There is a thing known to every honest clockmaker and to almost no one else, that a clock keeps no one's secret and takes no one's part. It does not run faster for the happy nor slower for the grieving. It does not flatter the master of the house nor spare the maid. Wound true and left to stand, it keeps the 1 hour there is, indifferent as the stars, while beneath its quiet face the whole household lies, to itself and to one another the entire length of a life. And of this the old benchmen say a harder thing still, that a well-dressed lie will pass with every soul who wishes to believe it or fears to doubt it, which is to say, with nearly everyone alive, save only the one plain person who happens to know what hour it truly was. A man may swear he lay in his own bed. A witness may swear to what she saw by a moon that was not that night in the sky. A great lady may swear that a humble book of hours was got up after the fact to spite her. But a clock that was stopped on a certain night was stopped, and a clock that ran 11 minutes fast ran 11 minutes fast. And there is no oath sworn on any Bible in England that can put an hour back into a movement which never struck it. And so the whole art of undoing a clever lie is not cleverness at all. It is only patience, and a true rate, and one unregarded soul that nobody thinks to watch, keeping the hours of a house that has long forgotten she keeps anything at all. Charlotte Ansell, Lottie, to the 2 or 3 below stairs who were fond of her, had been at Wrenmoor Court 6 years, and in all that time had contrived, with some care, to be very nearly invisible. She was 28 when the story begins, a slight, plain, quiet woman, with a still, level way of looking at things, brown hair bound back simply under a plain cap, and the composed, unhurried hands of a person raised to handle other people's treasures without ever presuming to own one. She had been born over a clockmaker's shop in the county town of Ambleworth, the only child of Nathaniel Ansell, clockmaker and mender of watches, a gentle, exact, unlucky man who understood the insides of a striking clock better than any man in 3 counties, and died no richer for it. Lottie had grown up at his bench as other children grow up in gardens. Before she was 12, she could tell the rate of a movement by the swing of it and the sound. She knew the maker's name and the year engraved upon a back plate, where no owner ever troubled to look. She knew the small private machinery of good clocks, the hidden drawers a cabinet maker builds into the plinth of a bracket clock, or the hood of a long case, the little sliding panels, the vanities of a proud trade, because half her father's work was in the clocks of the dead, and the other half was in what had sometimes been left forgotten inside them. And she knew hours. That above all. Her father would set 2 clocks going of an evening, one true and one he had put a hair out of true on purpose, and make a game of it. Which of them lies to you, Lottie, and by how much? A clock will tell you it is honest, he would say. They all say that. You must not take its word, you must take its rate. Wind a thing true, and let it stand, and it will keep the hour when every soul in the house is lying. The shop died with her father, killed, in the end, by a great gentleman who ordered a costly musical clock 2 years in the making, and then, when it was made, declined it and took the benefit of a delay in the law, so that Nathaniel Ansell's debts were paid with his stock and his tools, and his daughter was left at 22 with a decent black gown, a box of unsold movements nobody would buy, and her father's plain brass winding key, which she kept and keeps still. She went out, as portionless gentlewomen do, to be a companion, and it was Lady Emmeline Croft, a great cold personage of unquestioned county consequence, who liked to be known for placing deserving young women and for reminding them of it, who placed her at Wrenmoor Court as reader to the old Dowager Duchess. Lottie never forgot that she owed her bread to Lady Emmeline's patronage. She was not permitted to. Lady Emmeline reminded her of it graciously at every visit, the way one taps a barometer to see which way the weather means to go. The old Dowager died in Lottie's second year, and might have taken Lottie's employment into the grave with her, as such deaths generally do. But by then the house had discovered a use for her that no one else could fill. Wrenmoor Court kept some 30 clocks, long case clocks on the stairs and in the halls, bracket clocks in the good rooms, a great turret clock over the stable arch that governed the whole estate's day, the Duke's own repeater, a dozen lesser movements in the offices and the bedchambers, and a house of 30 clocks is a house of 30 small tyrannies, each wanting winding to its own day, each drifting off the truth in its own direction, and no two of them agreeing unless some patient hand makes them agree. There had been a man who did it, and he had grown too old and gone, and it was found almost by accident that the quiet reader with the clockmaker's hands could do it better than any man they might send for from the town. So Charlotte Ansell stayed on at Wrenmoor as the keeper of its clocks, which was no office known to the peerage, and carried no dignity whatever, and went round the whole great house every week with her father's brass key on a ribbon and a small book under her arm, winding and rating and setting each clock true against the sun, and in that book, the clock book, she called it, though nobody else ever called it anything, because nobody else knew it existed. She set down, in a fair small hand, the hour and the day and the doing this one wound, that one gaining a trifle and eased, the turret clock stopped a se'nnight for its cleaning. She kept it because her father had kept such a book, and because a clock, like a debt, is best not trusted to the memory. She could not have told you it would one day be the only honest thing in a house full of oaths. She kept it because it was her trade to keep it, and that is the whole reason the truth had a witness at Wrenmoor at all. Julian, Duke of Wrenmoor, was 35, and the county had 3 settled opinions of him: that he was the coldest just man, or the justest cold man in the shire, as you pleased; that he did his duty by his land and his people with a thoroughness that shamed warmer men, and that somewhere behind that courteous shut face there had once been a younger brother who had loved him, and a grief nobody now living was invited to name. Lottie had the story her first winter, from the housekeeper, in the tone kept for tombs. Julian was a second son, and had never looked to be a duke. The title and the burden had been his elder brother's, the late Duke, a warm, open, trusting man, beloved through 6 parishes, and that brother had, in the flower of his life, been quietly and comprehensively ruined by a friend. Not a swindler off the road, nothing so easy to see. A gentleman of the best manners and the best connections, vouched for by everyone who mattered, taken into the late Duke's whole confidence as man of business and companion, who had, behind the finest surface in the county, been robbing him for years, mortgaging what he had no right to mortgage, forging where forging served, drawing the estate white while he dined at its table and was toasted as its truest friend. It had come out at last, too late. The late Duke had spent his health and half his fortune putting it right and keeping it quiet, and had died not 45, worn through, leaving his cold exact younger brother to inherit a saved house and a lesson written in acid. And the lesson Julian had learned, the housekeeper did not put it so, but Lottie, who watched, put it so for herself, was that charm is the cheapest thing a man can wear, and the most expensive thing a house can trust; that a pleasant manner proves nothing, and a plausible tongue less; and that he, Julian, would give his confidence henceforth to what could be shown and counted and proved, and to nothing whatever that merely pleased him. He had made himself, in consequence, a master admired by all and known by none, a man who trusted ledgers over friends and slept the better for it. There was one member of his family, however, whom the whole county trusted on sight, and whom the Duke, for all his hard-bought wisdom, could not for the life of him prove anything against, and that was his cousin, Mr. Lucian Croft. Lucian was Lady Emmeline's son, the Duke's heir presumptive in default of nearer, some 10 years the Duke's junior, and he was everything Julian was not: warm, quick, delightful, the readiest laugh and the openest hand at any table in the shire, a young man of whom every mother spoke well and every servant fondly, welcome at Wrenmoor as the sunshine and about as easy to refuse. He had, the county agreed, only the one fault, and it was the fault of high-spirited young men. He played rather deep, and lived rather high, and wanted a fortune to match his manner. But that was nothing. His cousin was rich and childless. Lucian would come into it all in the end, and might be forgiven a little impatience with the meanwhile. So Lucian Croft came and went at Wrenmoor as he pleased, and charmed the household from the butler to the boot-boy, and was the one man in the world the careful Duke could not distrust without being told, by every soul he consulted, that he was grown sour and unjust. And Charlotte Ansell, who wound the clocks in the rooms where Mr. Lucian sat, and was no more noticed by him than the clocks were, had formed of Mr. Lucian, quite privately, exactly one opinion: that he was the pleasantest mannered man she had ever served, and that she would not have trusted him with the winding of a kitchen jack. And there was one thing more that Lottie Ansell knew and had never said, and it is as well to say it plainly at the start, because she never once said it herself, not in 6 years, not in her own room with the door shut, not in the dark. She loved the Duke. It had come on her slowly and against her judgment, the way rust comes into good steel, not for his face, though the face was well enough, but for the 100 small unwitnessed things a clock-keeper sees and a drawing-room never does, that he had never once passed the long case clock on the landing that stood forever stopped. The morning clock, halted at the hour his brother died, and never, in 10 years, set going again, without laying 2 fingers on its cold case briefly as a man touches a headstone, that he paid the schooling of 3 tenants' clever sons and had the bills sent to his steward so that no one might thank him, that he was gentlest exactly where he could least be seen. She loved him the way a sensible plain woman of 28 loves a duke, silently, thoroughly, without one grain of hope, and with a firm private arrangement that the thing should live and die inside her own ribs and trouble nobody. She would have told you, entirely resigned. People who keep their feelings wound tight and cased always believe the case will hold. It broke open on a bright morning in May, in the year 1820, and it broke open over a clock. The clock was a bracket clock of some age and beauty, ebony cased and brass mounted, that stood in the small closet off the old library, the room that had been the late Duke's private cabinet, shut up these 10 years and opened only to be dusted, a room the household entered as one enters a church on a weekday, softly and not for long. The clock had stopped, as a neglected clock will, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Gaunt, mentioned it to Lottie with the air of one conferring a tedious favor. His Grace wished the late Duke's rooms put in order against some visit of men of business, and the clock in the cabinet was to go again. So on that bright May morning Charlotte Ansell carried her key and her book and her small roll of tools into the shut-up cabinet, opened the shutters to the light, and knelt down to a clock that no one had wound since a man she had never met lay dying. She knew the maker at a glance, a good London name her father had spoken of with respect, and she knew, therefore, before she had the case open, that this was a clock built with a vanity in it, because that maker never made a bracket clock without its little hidden drawer under the movement, a shallow secret compartment in the plinth for a gentleman's private papers, released by a catch behind the fret. She set the movement to rights first, because that was her work, and she did her work before she indulged her curiosity, cleaned the pinions, freed the fly, found the fault, a dry pivot, nothing more, and had the honest old heart of it ticking again within the hour, striking the half with a sweet cracked note that had not been heard in that room in 10 years. And then, because she was her father's daughter and could no more leave a maker's secret drawer unopened than she could leave a knot untied, she felt behind the fret for the catch, and pressed it, and the little drawer slid out into her hand. It was not empty, and it did not hold a dead man's papers. It held a slim book bound in red, and a bundle of folded slips, and a key, and Lottie, kneeling there in the May light, understood what she was looking at slowly, in stages the way one understands bad news. The red book was a betting book, close written and recent, the entries running down into that very spring, columns of names and sums, mostly the same hand throughout, a quick, careless gentleman's hand she had seen 100 times on notes left carelessly about the good rooms. It was Mr. Lucian Croft's hand, and the sums in it made her cold. The folded slips were notes of hand, I promised to pay, Lucian's signature at the foot of every one, for amounts that no allowance from any cousin, however rich, could cover, held by names she did not know, and one or two she did, moneylenders' names, town names, and the key. The key was a plain, new, well-cut key, and Charlotte Ansell had wound the clocks of Wrenmoor Court for 6 years, and knew its every lock as a shepherd knows his sheep, and she knew, turning it over in the cold light, exactly which lock in the house it was cut to fit, the strong room, the plate closet and strong room, where the Duke's ready money, and the family silver, and the small precious portable things of a great house were kept behind an iron door to which there was, so far as the Duke of Wrenmoor believed, exactly one key, and it hung at his own steward's belt. And under everything, at the back of the little drawer, wrapped in a twist of wash leather, were 3 or 4 small objects that had no business in a betting man's cachet and every business in a strong room. A gold snuff box she had dusted a score of times on the library mantel and not seen these 6 months. 2 seals, a mourning ring. Small things, portable things. The kind of small portable things that vanish from a great house, one at a time over a year, and are each in their turn supposed mislaid, or dropped or taken by a dismissed underservant, and are never all counted together by any one person. Because no one person counts everything in a great house, no one, that is, but the invisible woman who goes into every room every week and notices, without meaning to, what is on every mantel, because she is winding the clock beside it. Lottie knelt a long time on the floor of the dead man's cabinet with the drawer in her lap, and the honest clock she had just set going ticked away over her head, keeping the true hour with perfect indifference while her whole safe life came quietly to pieces around her. For she saw the shape of it at once, entire, the way her father could see the whole fault of a movement from one wrong sound. Here was Mr. Lucian Croft, heir to a dukedom and beggared at the tables, robbing the house that would one day be his own, a little at a time, with a duplicate key cut to the one strong room lock in the confidence of the whole county. And here, in the one place in all Wrenmoor he was certain no living hand would ever look, a dead man's shut-up cabinet. Inside a stopped clock nobody had wound in 10 years, he had hidden the proof of it, the debts that drove him, the key that served him, and the very plunder itself, waiting to be carried off to town and turned into the money that his cousin would not give him and the tables would not stop taking. It was clever. It was very clever. It was exactly as clever as a man may be who has never in his life had to think about the woman who winds the clocks, because such a man does not know she exists. She put everything back precisely as she had found it: the book, the slips, the key, the small wrapped things, slid the drawer home, heard the catch take, and knelt on with her cold hands folded, thinking. And the first clear thought that came to her, ahead of fear, ahead of anything, was her father's, in her father's voice: "You must not take its word, Lottie. You must take its rate." She would take nothing on a first sight and a warm guess. She had been bred to prove a thing before she pronounced upon it, and a charge of this size against a gentleman of Mr. Lucian's standing must rest on something no charm and no rank and no great lady's outrage could talk away. She had a week before that clock need be touched again. She would use it. She used it the way she had been taught, patiently, exactly, and in writing. The strong room first, because a theft wants a method proved. She could not open the iron door, she had no key, and would not have used the false one for the world. But she did not need to be inside it to check it against the evidence in her own two hands. The betting book gave dates, the notes of hand gave dates, and a great house keeps, in its steward's office, its own dull, dated records of when the plate was got out for a dinner and put away again, when moneys were drawn, when the Michaelmas rents came in, and where they were lodged. Lottie had no business in the steward's office, but she wound the clock in it every Thursday. And Mr. Hollis the steward, a plain, honest, overworked man, thought no more of her presence there than of the coal scuttles, and it is astonishing what an invisible woman may read off an open ledger while she appears to be attending to a striking train. She did not tamper, she did not take, she only looked and remembered, and afterward set down in her own book, in her own hand, dated, what she had seen, that on such a night the plate had been out for a dinner and a piece of it not seen since, that on such a night a sum had been lodged in the strong room, and a lesser sum found thereafter. Small discrepancies, each nothing by itself, each explained a dozen innocent ways, but every one of them falling on a date that matched a date in the red book in the clock. A single coincidence is an accident. A column of them, all leaning the same way, is a confession. Then the hours, because a clock keeper's testimony is in hours, and hers would have to be. She thought back and checked her own clock book and found there the small dry entries that told her when Mr. Lucian had been at Wrenmoor and went away, because a house runs differently when there is a guest of consequence in it, and she had noted, in her incurious way, the changes. The good rooms opened, the extra fires, the later hours the clocks were let run before the house was shut. His visits and the discrepancies kept company. She was building, sheet by sheet, dated like a tradesman's inventory, exactly the kind of case her father would have built to date a doubtful clock, not a flash of insight to be believed or disbelieved, but a quiet accumulation of small hard facts that a stranger could check for himself and be forced, however unwilling, to the same end. And last, because paper tells what but seldom why, she went one evening to the lodge, to old Reuben Tench. Reuben Tench had kept the night gate and trimmed the lamps at Wrenmoor for upwards of 40 years, and was pensioned now to the gate lodge with his rheumatism and his pipe, still let sit up of a night because he could not sleep, and liked the dark and the quiet, and knowing who came and went. He was past 70, slow, sharp-eyed, and close as the grave, and Lottie was on quiet terms with him as the two people in a great house who kept its unregarded hours, she going her rounds by day among the clocks, he keeping his by night among the lamps. They sat in the lodge over his fire, and Lottie, who had thought hard about what she might honestly ask, said only that in setting the old cabinet clock to rights she had come on some old papers she did not rightly understand, touching Mr. Lucian, and that before she carried the matter higher, she wished to know whether Reuben had ever, in his night-keeping, seen anything of that gentleman out of the common. The old man drew on his pipe a while, and looked at the fire, and then he said, "So somebody's found it out at last. I always reckoned it wanted a body that goes about quiet." He turned to her. "I'll tell you what I've seen, Miss Ansell, and what I've seen is all I'll swear to, mind. Mr. Lucian's a pleasant young gentleman, and I've nothing against him but my own 2 eyes. 3 times, 4, this 12-month past, I've seen him about these courts at hours no honest sleeper keeps. 2 of the morning, 3 of the morning, coming down from the house by the stable side, not the way a guest comes, and once with a bag he did not take up empty, and me in the dark of the lodge where he never thought to look, for young gentlemen never do think a old man's awake behind a dark window. I said nothing, then nor after. I'm a servant, or was with a pension to lose and no wish to call a duke's heir a thief on my own say-so and be turned off for a mad old liar. What a old man sees at a great house he buries, or he starves, but I'll not carry it into the ground if it's wanted above it now." He knocked out his pipe. "Is he to know at last, then, His Grace?" "Yes," said Lottie, "he is to know." "Then thank God for it, and mind how you go," said Reuben Tench, and looked at her with the terrible plainness of the very old. "For you're a woman with no name and no friends, and a place you can lose in an hour. And he's a gentleman born that half the county'd swear was in heaven's own choir. And if it comes to your word against his, my dear, you know as well as I do whose the world will take. Get it before His Grace himself, quiet and quick and all at once, and let the papers do your talking, for your own poor breath won't carry against that young man's smile. Quick and quiet, Miss Ansell. And His Grace first, before any living soul, before her ladyship his mother most of all." Lottie walked back up the dark avenue with her certainty complete, and that ought to have been the end of her hesitation, and instead it was that night, alone in her small room with her sheets of dated notes spread on the bed and 1 candle burning, that Charlotte Ansell met the worst hour of her life. Because she understood, with the whole force of a mind trained to reckon consequences, exactly what she held. It was not merely a thief she was about to name. It was a beloved man, the heir of the house, the son of her own patroness, and she was to name him on the word of a nobody. Reuben was right, and she had known it before Reuben said it. There was not a soul at Wrenmoor, from the Duke down, who would not sooner believe that the plain gray clock woman had turned malicious or mad than that laughing Mr. Lucian was a common thief, and the moment she opened her mouth she made herself, in every eye, exactly the low, spiteful, scheming creature that a great house always suspects its quiet dependents of secretly being. The papers might save her. She believed they would. She had staked her own hard reckoning on it. But between the speaking and the proving lay a stretch of days in which she would be a servant accusing her betters. And anything might be done to a servant in such days. The false key could be moved. The clock could be emptied in an hour. The cachet could be spirited away, and she left standing with a wild tale and no proof, and a ruined name. Or worse, far worse. The thought arrived cold and complete, and she made herself look at it. The cachet could be moved from the dead man's clock into her own poor box under the eaves, and the thief's story told the other way about. And who in that house would doubt for one instant which of them was the robber, the gentleman or the winder of clocks? And there was the fire, 4 feet from where she sat. She had only to burn her notes and forget the drawer and go on winding the clocks, and the house would stay exactly as it was. Mr. Lucian would rob it white and come into the rest. And it was no affair of hers. She was fed and dry and near the man she loved, and to keep silent cost her nothing but the knowing. And she had grown very practiced at carrying things she must not set down. Nobody would ever be the wiser. There was not one soul alive who knew what stood in that clock but herself and the man who had put it there. And he did not know she knew. She sat with that a long while, quite still, the way she sat with everything. And she made herself do it honestly, which was the hard part. Made herself feel the whole weight of the safe, silent, cowardly, sensible course, and not pretend to be above it. She was not above it. To speak was to lose everything, and perhaps her liberty besides. For a house that turns on a dependent does not always trouble to be just, and to be silent was to lose nothing but her own good opinion, which no one else would ever see. She thought of Lady Emmeline, who had taken her from a bankrupt shop and never let her forget it, and whose only son this was, and she understood that to save the house from Lucian was to break his mother, who had done Lottie the one great kindness of her life, and she sat with that too, because it was true, and because her father had taught her that you do not get to choose only the easy half of a truth. And then, because she was her father's daughter before she was anything else, she took up the plain brass winding key that lay always on her table, the key her father's hand had worn smooth, and turned it over and heard him. A clock keeps no one's secret and takes no one's part, Lottie. It is the one honest thing in most houses, and it is honest because it wants nothing. You cannot make it want something and have it keep true time. The two won't live together. She had wound this man's clocks true for 6 years while she wanted nothing from him. And here, at last, was the night when wanting something, her safety, her place, her nearness to him, would ask her to let a clock lie. That was the whole of it. Laid plain, she could be safe or she could be true, and she could not this night be both. Her father had never in his life set a clock to please a customer, though it had cost him customers and, in the end, his shop. Whoever keeps you, child, let them keep an honest hour. Charlotte Ansell blew out the candle and sat in the dark until the birds began. And when the maid brought her water at 7, she was already dressed, and her sheets of notes were ordered and tied, and her face, Sukey Marsh, the young housemaid, said afterward she remembered it, was the face of somebody walking to church. At 9 o'clock, when the Duke's cousin was safely at his late breakfast and the study was the Duke's alone, she knocked at the door of Julian, Duke of Wrenmoor, and asked, in the voice of a woman asking about a stopped clock, whether his grace could spare his clock-keeper 1/2 hour on a matter touching the security of the house. It was the 11th of May in the year 1820. Whatever else the county afterward said of her, and it said a great deal, in its time, no one was ever able to say she had slept on it one night longer than honesty required. The study at Wrenmoor was a long room smelling of leather and cold ash, and the Duke received her at his writing table with the complete, courteous attention he gave to drains, leases, and the deserving poor. She had thought for a week about how this must be done, and had settled it upon one principle. Her father's, never ask a man to believe your word where you can put the thing itself into his hand. So she did not begin with Mr. Lucian's name. She began with the clock. Your Grace. In setting the late Duke's cabinet clock to rights, I opened a drawer that the maker built into the plinth, that Maker builds one into every clock of the kind, hidden behind the fret, and it was not empty. I have read enough of what is in it to know that it is not mine to keep, and not mine to keep from you, and that once you have seen it, nothing in this house will be as it was this morning. I ask leave to show you what is in the clock, and to say very little while you look, and I ask that you come and open the drawer yourself, with your own hand, so that you need take nothing whatever on mine. Afterward you will have questions, and I will answer every one, and then, if you wish it, I will pack my box tonight. But the clock first. Your Grace, my word in this is worth nothing, and I know it. The clock's is worth everything. He looked at her for a moment with something that was not yet alarm. She was famously, restfully dull. It was her whole value in that house, but was no longer the attention he gave to drains. Then he rose and said, "Show me." And Charlotte Ansell led the Duke of Wrenmoor down the passage to his dead brother's cabinet, where the honest old clock she had mended was ticking away the true minutes over the whole quiet ruin of his heir, and she stood aside and had him feel behind the fret for the catch, and press it himself, and the little drawer slid out into the Duke's own hand. She watched it reach him in stages, as she had known it would. The betting book first, and the small ordinary frown of a man reading a hand he half knows in a place it cannot be. Then the notes of hand, and the frown going still. Then the key, and she saw him know it, saw the exact instant the Duke of Wrenmoor recognized his own strong room in a key he had never had cut, and understood that there were two where he had believed there was one. And last, slowest, the little twist of wash leather, which he unwrapped standing, and found his own snuff-box in, and the seals, and the mourning ring, and the Duke, who governed everything he showed the world and had done for 10 hard years, stood in his brother's shut-up room, and went very still. Still the way the park goes before thunder. Not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of a great force holding. "This is my brother's cabinet," he said at last, and his voice was level. It was the wrong level. A floor with nothing beneath it. No one comes here. That is rather the point of it. He turned the false key in his fingers. "This is cut to my strong room. There is one key to my strong room. It hangs on Hollis's belt and has done for 11 years. He looked at the snuff-box in his hand as though he had never seen it, which in a sense he had not for 6 months. "Whose hand is in this book, Miss Ansell?" "Your Grace knows the hand," she said gently, "or you would not have gone so quiet. But I will not name it for you. You shall name it yourself, or not at all, for the whole force of this is that no one is asking you to believe me. Every date in that red book, and on those notes of hand, falls on a day I can show you in your own steward's records, a day the plate was out and a piece not seen again. A day money was lodged and less of it found. I have set them down, dated in my own book, for you to check against Mr. Hollis's, which I have not touched, and you may seal this hour. And the hours match Mr. Lucian's visits, which I can also show you, because I keep an account of the clocks, and the clocks keep an account of the house. I have proved nothing to you, Your Grace. I have only laid it where you can prove it to yourself. That was all I came to do." And the Duke of Wrenmoor stood a long time with his brother's snuff-box in one hand and his heir's ruin in the other, in the room where the one honest man he had ever loved had died of exactly this, of a charming, well-loved, comprehensively trusted thief at his own table, and Charlotte Ansell, who would have given a year of her life for the right to say one warm word to him, stood by the shuttered window and gave him the only mercy in her power, which was to look at the floor and let him not have to compose his face. "You understand what you have done," he said at last, low, not looking at her. You have brought me, on your own 2 feet, the thing that killed my brother, wearing a face I am fond of. And you have brought it to me first, before my mother, before the house, before anyone who might have persuaded you to be quiet and comfortable. Why? You are not a fool. You have reckoned your own position in this to a farthing. You reckon everything, I am told. It would have burned in 5 minutes and no soul the wiser. Every interest you have in the world said burn it. Why am I holding it? And Lottie, who had answered that question in the dark with her whole life in the scale, found it simple to answer in the daylight. Because it is your house, your grace, and your key, and your brother's clock, and the truth was owed to you and to no one else. My father kept clocks, and the whole creed of that trade, before profit and before comfort, is that a clock keeps no one's secret and takes no one's part. You wind it true and let it stand, though it cost you the custom of every great man in the county, as it cost him. I have wound your clocks true for 6 years, wanting nothing from you. I was not going to let one of them lie the first night that being honest grew expensive. That is all. It is not courage, quite. It is only trade. I do not know how to keep a false hour. I never learned it, and I am too old to learn it now. She gathered herself. I ask nothing, your grace, and I expect nothing, and I know what a servant's word is worth against a gentleman's, which is why I have troubled to bring you a clock instead. Only, when you come to weigh what is to be done, remember that I chose this at 9 this morning, knowing precisely what it would cost me, and let that be the measure of whether I am the kind of woman who would also invent it. He looked up at her then. Really looked, she thought afterward, for the first time in 6 years. The gray figure at the window, resolving all at once into a person. And something crossed his shut face that she could not read and did not try to. You will oblige me, he said finally, in a voice scraped clean, by remaining at Wrenmoor, Miss Ansell, and by saying nothing to anyone, and by leaving the clock exactly as it is, wound and ticking and full. I am going to prove this to myself, as you have been careful to allow me to. And then I am going to deal with it. It appears you are the only person in my house I can presently be sure is telling me the truth, which is a strange thing to owe to the winder of the clocks, and I find I owe it entirely. He paused, and added, with difficulty, as a man brings out a coin from a nearly empty purse, "Thank you. I am told I say it seldom. I imagine I shall be saying it to you for some while." And Charlotte Ansell curtsied, and went out, and got as far as the landing before she had to sit down on the window seat beside the stopped morning clock, because her knees had resigned, and she sat there a long time in the quiet, next to the one clock in the house she was not allowed to start, listening to the whole enormous machinery of consequence begin, very softly, 2 floors below her, to turn. The Duke proved it to himself in 3 days, quietly, the way she had shown him he could. He had Mr. Hollis's records brought to him, and sat with them and her book side by side, alone, a whole evening, and came out of it gray. He had the strong-room lock examined by a locksmith fetched secretly from the town, who found what an honest lock always shows to a knowing eye, that it had been opened by a key not the true one, the wards faintly bright where a new cut key had bedded. He tried the false key himself once in the iron door, at midnight alone, and it turned. And he stood a long time in the strong-room doorway after it had turned, and no one ever knew what he thought. He had his solicitor, Miss Sowerby, up from the town on a pretext, and copies made of the betting book and the notes of hand and the whole content of the drawer, attested and dated and lodged where no fire could reach them, so that whatever else befell, the truth was now beyond burning. And through all of it the honest cabinet clock ticked on, wound and full and undisturbed, keeping its true hour over the cash exactly as she had left it, because the Duke understood, without being told twice, that the drawer must not be emptied until the moment came to empty it in front of witnesses. It was on the third evening that he told her about his brother. He found her in the library. She had contrived to be finding a book, and he stood at the long window with the last light on him and gave the account plainly, as a man renders accounts to a partner, which she did not yet understand was exactly what he was doing. He told her of the friend, the perfect friend, vouched for by all, who had drawn the estate white while the late Duke toasted him, of how the young Julian had distrusted the man from the first on nothing he could name, a wrongness, a too-smoothness, a rate that did not match its face, and had said so, and been laughed at for a sour boy who could not bear his brother's happiness, of how it had all come out at last, too late, and his brother had spent his health saving the house and died of the saving, and of the thing Julian had carried out of it, which was that he would never again be laughed out of his own eyes, and never again trust a pleasant surface, and never again be the fool who saw the fault and let a warm voice talk him past it. And then, he said, you brought me a clock. Do you know what you have been to me this week, Miss Ansell? You have been the one person in 10 years who did not ask me to take anything on trust. You brought me a thing I could prove, and let me prove it, and stood aside while I did. My brother's friend never once in his life offered to be checked. It is the surest mark of the honest, I have come to think. They cannot wait to be checked. It is only the liar who asks you to take his word. I have spent this evening being more grateful to you than I know how to say, and I am aware I have not said it. And I am telling you now that the not saying is my failing and not your due. Charlotte Ansell stood with her book held to her like a breastplate and said that his grace owed her nothing, that she had done her trade and no more, and he looked at her in a way that made the trade a poor small word for it, and said nothing, and the light went off the park, and they stood a while in the dusk not speaking, two silent people in a great quiet room, nearer to one another in that silence than either of them had been to any living soul in years, and neither of them able to say so, and both of them, in the honest dark, perfectly aware of it. But a house of 30 clocks is a house of 1,000 eyes, and Mr. Lucian Croft had not stayed alive at the tables on a fool's wits. He came down to Wrenmoor that same week, easy and laughing as ever, and within a day he had felt, under all the smiling, that the ground had shifted. His cousin's manner to him, always cool, had gone cooler and stranger. The old cabinet had been opened and set in order. He learned, by the clockwoman, a locksmith had been at the house, the solicitor had come and gone. A guilty man reads a house the way Lottie read a clock, by the small wrongnesses, and Lucian read this one true. He did not know how much was known, or by whom, or what stood yet in the clock. But he knew that the invisible gray woman who wound the clocks had been in the one room he had trusted, and that everything had gone wrong since. And he was far too clever to wait to be accused. He did the thing that clever cornered men do, the thing his cousin's dead friend had done before him. He decided to strike first, and to strike at the weakest and least believed creature in the house, and to make the accuser the accused before she could open her mouth. And he went to his mother. What passed between Mr. Lucian and Lady Emmeline no one ever fully knew, but it may be guessed, for Lady Emmeline loved her son with the whole fierce blind force of a proud woman who has only the one, and would have believed him against the evidence of Scripture. He told her, this much came out after, that the clockwoman, That ungrateful nobody his mother had charitably placed had been robbing the house for years under cover of her rounds, going everywhere, noticed by no one, that she had lately been surprised at it and, being cornered, was got up to turn the tale about and cast the theft upon him, Lucian, out of spite and self-preservation, and that unless she were stopped and shown up at once, before she could pour her poison into the Duke's ear, she would ruin an innocent gentleman on the word of a servant. It was a good story. It was, indeed, precisely the true story, with the two chief persons changed about, which is always the best kind of lie, and the hardest to unpick, and Lady Emmeline, who wanted with her whole heart to believed it entire, and rose up in the majesty of 70 years of unquestioned consequence to destroy the grey woman who threatened her son. They did it in the great drawing-room, on a golden evening, and they furnished the scene with care. For Lady Emmeline did nothing without witnesses of quality. She had the rector, Dr. Pardoe, who had called and been kept. She had Mrs. Gaunt, the housekeeper, who had long been in her ladyship's interest, and had carried her the tale of the open cabinet and the closeted clockwoman in the first place. She had her own woman, and two upper servants at the doors, and, this was the sharp stroke, she had two other witnesses waiting, a groom and a village man, brought up and coached, and paid, ready to swear to what they had seen. And she had the room made ready and Miss Ansell sent for, and let the plain grey figure walk the whole length of that golden floor toward her before she spoke. Miss Ansell. Her ladyship's voice could have frosted the windows. I placed you in this house, out of charity to your father's misfortunes, 6 years ago. I am told how you have repaid it. You will stand there and be silent and hear me. It is known that you have had the run of every room in this house these 6 years, winding your clocks, going everywhere, marked by no one. It is known that valuable things have been missing from Wrenmoor this year, and more I need not itemize. His Grace's own household can. And it is now come to light, from persons who have seen you, that you have been abroad in the courts of this house by night, when honest women sleep, carrying what was not yours, and that being lately discovered in it, you have had the matchless insolence to prepare some slander against my son, to save your own neck by fixing your crimes on a gentleman. I know what you are. I knew what you were when I took you from a bankrupt shop, and I blame only my own soft heart that I did not foresee it. You will confess before this company what you have taken and where it lies, and you will be gone from this house by morning. And count yourself fortunate, Miss Ansell, if His Grace can be prevailed upon to be content with your dismissal and not with the constable and the assizes. There was a silence. The rector studied the carpet in an agony. Mrs. Gaunt looked at Lottie the way the winning look, and then the two coached witnesses were called forward and told their tale, and it was a good tale, well drilled, circumstantial, dreadful, and it hanged itself, though not one soul in that room yet knew it, on the very thing that was meant to make it unanswerable. Its particulars. The groom swore he had seen the clockwoman cross the stable court by night, carrying a bag, 3 weeks since, on the Tuesday, plain as day, for the stable clock was just then striking of 12 over my head, and I looked up at the stroke, and there she was against the moon. And the village man swore to the same woman on the road below the park a fortnight back. And a fine full moon there was that night, near bright as morning. I see her face by it clear as I see hers now. And Charlotte Ansell, standing alone on all that polished floor in her grey gown, with her place gone, and her name in the fire, and everything she had reckoned upon in the dark, arriving exactly to her estimate, discovered that her voice was, after all, perfectly steady, Because, she thought, with a flicker of desolate inward calm, they have told me the hour. They did not have to, and they have hung it on the clocks, and the clocks are the one thing in this house that are mine. I will answer everything her ladyship has charged, she said in order, and before this company, and I ask only that the company remember afterward that I did not seek this audience. I was summoned to it, and given no notice of the charge, and no counsel, and no warning, and that I answered it notwithstanding, on the instant, with facts that any of you may go out and check tonight. I have taken nothing from this house, ever, and I do not ask you to believe that on my word, for my word, I am well aware, is worth nothing in this room against a gentleman's. I ask you to believe the clocks, which have no interest in me or in Mr. Lucian, and cannot be got up, and cannot be bribed, and were keeping their hours in this house long before tonight, and will keep them long after. Your ladyship's man swears he saw me cross the stable court 3 weeks since, on the Tuesday, by the stroke of the stable clock at midnight, against the moon. I keep that clock, madam, as I keep them all, and I keep a book of them, dated in my own hand, wound and rated and repaired, week by week, these 6 years. A book I began long before this night, and for no purpose but my trade, which is the whole reason it can be trusted, for no one gets up a false record years in advance against a slander not yet invented. And my book will show this company, and the man who made the movement will confirm it, and his Grace's own coachman will confirm it, that on that Tuesday 3 weeks since, and for 8 days together about it, the stable clock was not striking at all, for it was stopped and down from its case, and standing in pieces on my own bench in the clock-room being cleaned, as that great turret clock is cleaned once in the year, and a clock that is in pieces on a bench cannot strike 12 over any man's head in any court. Send for the coachman, madam. Send to the town for the man who cleaned the movement with me. The stable clock did not strike that night, because it could not, and a witness who swears he looked up at a stroke that was never struck has told this company, very exactly, the price at which he was bought. And your ladyship's second man swears he saw my face on the road a fortnight back, by a fine full moon near bright as morning. There is an almanac in the steward's office, madam, as there is in every office in England, and it is no friend of mine, and no enemy of Mr. Lucian's. And it will tell this company that a fortnight back the moon was 3 days dark, not full, madam, gone, not risen at all that night, nor to rise till near the dawn, and that there was no more moon on that road for any man to see a face by than there is on the floor of a coal pit. He saw my face bright by a moon that was not in the sky. They have both of them sworn to a light and an hour that were not there to be sworn to, because they were told what to say by someone who did not trouble to ask the clocks or the almanac first. Someone, madam, who is very used to being believed on his say-so, and has never in his life had to reckon with the one witness in this house that keeps its account whether he smiles at it or no. It was very quietly done. The whole room agreed on that much afterward. Whatever else the county came to quarrel over, the clockwoman never once raised her voice, which somehow made it worse. And into the enormous, spreading, dreadful silence that followed, the rector's head come up, Mrs. Gaunt's face gone uncertain as a guttering candle, the two witnesses looking anywhere but at each other. Mr. Lucian Croft, who had been standing easy at his mother's shoulder through the whole of it with a faint amused patience, as a gentleman endures the ravings of a cornered inferior, made the first and last mistake of his charming life. He laughed, lightly, in amused disbelief, and said to the room, in the warm, careless voice that had opened every door in the county to him, "This is very ingenious, and quite mad. A book of her own writing, that she made herself, proving her own innocence, one has only to say it aloud. Mother, she had all night in that clockroom to write whatever hours suited her. The stable clock might have struck 100 times or stood a fortnight. Who is to know but her? You cannot hang a gentleman on a servant's diary of her own. And stopped. 1/2 second too late. Stopped. Hearing it himself, as his mother had not yet heard it, as the room had not yet heard it. For no one in that drawing-room had said one word of the clock-room, nor of a fortnight standing, nor of that clock striking or standing at all, save Charlotte Ansell 1 moment since. And how should Mr. Lucian Croft, who had been 3 counties off at his tables the week the stable clock came down, and cared no more for the winding of clocks than for the price of coals, how should he know to sneer at it that the stable clock had stood a fortnight, unless he had gone to some trouble to learn precisely which nights that clock was silent, the better to tell his bought-men when to swear they had heard it strike? The one man in the room who should have known nothing of the clocks had just corrected the clock-keeper on the length of a stoppage. The liar had reached, from long habit, past the thing he could safely know, and closed his hand on the thing that only the maker of the lie could know. And in the vast stillness that followed, his mother turned her head and looked at her son. And the double doors at the room's end opened, and the Duke of Wrenmoor came in, with Mr. Sowerby the solicitor at his shoulder, and Mr. Hollis the steward behind. And it was plain from the first word that he had been in the hall long enough to have heard the whole of it. "You are quite right, Lucian," he said into the silence, pleasantly, terribly. "One cannot hang a gentleman on a servant's diary. Happily no one proposes to. One may, however, do a great deal with a locksmith, a solicitor, and a clock." He crossed the golden floor, and he did a thing first that the room never forgot. He stopped before Charlotte Ansell, and made her a bow, the low, exact bow one makes to an equal, absurd, and deliberate across all that gulf of rank, delivered before the rector and the housekeeper and the servants at the doors, a bow that rearranged the standing of every soul in the room, and was meant to. Then he straightened and turned to his cousin, and spoke as evenly as a man reading a lease. "The cabinet clock," he said, in his late brother's rooms, had a hidden drawer, as its maker's clocks all did. In that drawer, wound and ticking and undisturbed this fortnight past under Miss Ansell's care and his own strict order, lay a betting book in a hand every man present would know. A sheaf of notes of hand for sums no honest gentleman could owe. A key, new cut and false, that a locksmith had that week found to fit, and had watched the Duke's own hand turn in. The one iron door in Wrenmoor to which there was supposed to be no second key, and, wrapped in leather at the back, certain small missing treasures of the house, his own snuff-box among them, taken from the strong room that false key was cut to open. All of it copied, attested before a notary, and lodged in the town, so that no fire anywhere could now be of the smallest service to anybody. You hid your ruin in the one room in my house where you were sure no living hand would ever go, said the Duke, and you were very nearly right. You had reckoned every soul at Wrenmoor but one. You forgot that somebody winds the clocks. Gentlemen always do. He let that stand a moment. There will be no constable, and no assizes, and no public shame, not to spare you, Lucian. But because I will not hang this family's name in a courtroom for the county to feast on, and because there is in this room a lady to whom I owe more than I will pay her in that coin. He did not look at his aunt as he said it, which was the one mercy he showed her. You will be gone from Wrenmoor tonight, and from England within the month. Your debts I will discharge, once to the last farthing, and there is an end of my purse forever. You will have an allowance abroad, sufficient and not a penny above, and it will continue precisely as long as your absence and your silence do. And should one word ever be traced to you against Miss Ansell's name or her honesty, from Calais or Vienna or the moon, your betting book and your false key and your notes of hand go the same day to every magistrate and every drawing room in the shire, with my compliments. You taught me nothing I did not already know. Lucian, my brother, taught it me first, and better, and it cost him his life. But I will say this for you. You have made me, at the last, very glad of my clock-keeper. Lady Emmeline Croft did not speak. She had risen from her chair somewhere in the middle of it, and she stood now looking at her son with a face from which 70 years of consequence were draining visibly away into the carpet, and on it a thing far worse than defeat. Belief. She had heard the half-seconds slip as clearly as any soul in the room. She had watched him reach past the safe truth for the guilty knowledge. She knew, now past any mother's power to unknow it, which of the two before her was the thief, and which the honest woman she had come to ruin. She turned once and looked down the golden length of the room at Charlotte Ansell, a long, terrible, stripped look in which there was no apology, for such women do not apologize, but in which there was, for one naked instant, the whole knowledge of what she had tried to do and to whom, and of what her love had made her the instrument of. Then she gathered the wreck of her dignity about her like a shawl, and went out, upright, past her son, not touching him. And it was observed by the servants that her ladyship, who had entered every room at Wrenmoor these 40 years as though it were her own, went out of that one looking at the floor. Mistress Lucian went that night. Mrs. Gaunt, the housekeeper, gave her notice within the week, unasked, having the wit at least to know what her tale-bearing had set marching and where it had come home to. The 2 bought witnesses were sent about their business with a warning that quieted them for life, and old Reuben Tench was fetched up to the house in the gig, at his Grace's own order, to sit by a good fire and be thanked. It was the evening after Mr. Lucian's chaise had gone that the Duke came to find her. She was in the clock-room, among the movements and the swinging pendulums and the small honest voices of the trade, packing her father's tools into their roll. For she had, that morning, written out and sent to Mr. Hollis her notice, that with the late Duke's rooms now set in order and the household's business concluded, Miss Ansell begged leave to be released at Michaelmas, and would be obliged for the favor of a character. She had promised herself this one dignity on the night of the candle, that whatever he became when it was over, he should never once have to wonder what to do about the plain woman who knew everything and loved him. She would be gone before the question could form. It was, she considered, a clean and sensible arrangement, and if she wept while she rolled up her father's tools, the tools did not show it, which is the whole use of a chamois cloth. "You gave notice," said the Duke from the doorway. He had her letter in his hand. Hollis brought it me, a fair small steady hand, and Michaelmas, and the favor of a character. He came in among the clocks. "I have read a great many documents this fortnight, Miss Ansell, most of them wicked. That one frightened me worse than any of them." "There is nothing in it to frighten your Grace," said Lottie, steadily, going on with her tools, because to stop would have been to look at him. "The house's trouble is mended, and my part in it is done, and it is not fitting I stay on. Your Grace will want the clocks kept. There is a very good man in Ambleworth, my father's old journeyman, honest as daylight, and I will write out for him every clock in the house and its ways, so that nothing is lost by my—" "I do not want a man from Ambleworth," said the Duke. "I want to know why you are going, and I want the true reason, which you have not put in your letter, because you do not lie even now, but you have left it out, which is the nearest to lying you know how to come." You found the thing that killed my brother wearing a face I loved. You brought it to me at the cost of everything you had, and stood in that drawing room alone and let them call you a thief to your face, and answered them with clocks, and never once, from first to last, asked me for a single thing. And now you mean to walk out at Michaelmas and be invisible in some other man's house for the rest of your life, and let me imagine it was all only trade. Do me the justice, since you deal in truth. Is that the shape of it? That is the shape of it, said Charlotte Ansell, because she did not lie even now, and then, because the case was open anyway and there was nothing left in it to guard, not only trade, your grace. I have loved you 6 years. A woman may do that decently while nobody knows, serve honestly and want nothing, and be the better keeper of your clocks for it, and no harm done to any soul on earth. She cannot stay once the man has any cause to guess there is anything to know. I gave you the clock because it was yours, and the truth was yours. I am going because I am not saint enough to wind your clocks for 30 years, and watch you be grateful, and call gratitude enough, and grow sour on it in the end. Even my father's trade never asked that of anybody. So, Michaelmas, and you need not look at me so, as though I were a thing newly discovered. I am the same dull woman who has wound your clocks these 6 years. Nothing whatever has altered but what you know. Nothing whatever has altered but what I know, the Duke repeated, and something happened to his shut face that the county would not have recognized. It opened. Miss Ansell, Charlotte, everything that has ever mattered in my life has turned upon exactly that, upon what I knew and when. My brother was ruined because he did not know in time. I froze myself solid for 10 years because I had learned to trust nothing I could not prove, and a man who trusts nothing is only wretched by a slower road than a man who trusts a thief. And then a plain, gray, truthful woman walked into my study and would not let me take anything on trust, brought me a clock, and made me open the drawer with my own hand, and stood aside while I proved my own grief to myself. And I have spent a fortnight discovering that the one thing in this world I can wholly rely upon is the honesty of the person who keeps my hours. I am not grateful to it, madam. I am past grateful. The stillness and the exactness and the plain courage that never once flattered me and told me the truth when the truth cost you everything, I have watched it 6 years and called it reliability. And I was a fool, for its name is not reliability. I would have said this better at 25, that man was easier company. You must make do with the one my brother's death left behind. I have had 10 years of not being able to trust what pleased me. Let me, for once, be able to trust what I love. Marry me, Charlotte. Keep my hours the rest of my life. And Charlotte Ansell, who had opened every hidden drawer at Wrenmoor but the one behind her own ribs, and found even that, at the last, standing open and its whole poor honest content on view, set down her father's tools, and looked at him with her father's level eyes, and gave him her answer plainly, because plainness was the only dialect she had ever kept. Yes, she said, and you may check it against me every day of your life, your grace, and you will find it keeps true time, for I was bred by a man who never in his days set a clock to please a customer, and I do not know how to give you a false hour, and I never learned it, and now I never shall. They were married before the year turned, quietly, from the court, by Dr. Pardoe, who told the story of that drawing-room evening at every dinner he ate for the rest of his life, and never once got the striking of the stable clock wrong, which for a country rector was reckoned miraculous. And old Reuben Tench sat in a good pew, and Sukey Marsh cried into her apron, and caught the bride's glove, and kept it 40 years. The county offered a duke married to a clockmaker's daughter, and no scandal it could prove, said everything that might be looked for, at length, behind its fans. Schemer lasted a season, cunning creature another, and then had to sit and watch, across the years, the one spectacle that gossip has no answer to. Two quiet people, visibly, durably, unfashionably happy. The new Duchess of Wrenmoor never played the great lady and never once tried. She kept her father's plain brass winding key in her workbox beside the little false key that had been the ruin of a charming man, that his grace let her keep, as one keeps the tooth of a beast that nearly had you, she went on, to the housekeeper's scandal, and then to the housekeeper's pride, winding the great clocks of Wrenmoor with her own hands every week of her life. Because she said, and meant it, that a thing worth keeping true is worth keeping true yourself. And she opened the old library 2 days in the week to any soul in the parish who wished to learn to read a face or a figure or a page, saying that her father had taught her at a bench, and it had been the making of her, and she saw no reason the children of Wrenmoor should be taught only by the great to value only the great. And the morning clock on the landing, the long case clock, stopped 10 years at the hour the late Duke died, that Julian had touched in passing every day of his grief, and never once allowed to be set going. The Duke brought her to it, one October evening, not long after they were wed, and stood a while with his 2 fingers on its cold case, and then said, "Lo, it has kept his hour long enough." He was robbed by a man he trusted, and he died of it, and I have stopped my own life at that hour ever since, as this clock has. But you have shown me the whole of it now, and given him, through you, the justice he never got living. And I think he would be better pleased to have the house keep true time again than to keep his death forever. Will you start it, Charlotte? I have never been able to. It wants the honestest hand in the house, and that is yours, not mine. And the Duchess of Wrenmoor took her father's brass key and wound the long-stopped clock and set it true against the sun by the window. And it took up its true hour again after 10 years, and the house, for the first time since a good man had been cheated to death in it, kept one honest time throughout, from the turret over the stable to the little movement in the dead man's cabinet. And if she wept doing it, and if he did, there was no one by to see but the 2 of them, and the clocks, which keep no one's secret and take no one's part, and told nobody. They had, together, better than 30 years, and the man the county had priced as the coldest just man in the shire grew warm so gradually and so wholly that the young folk who came after could never be made to credit the old repute of him. To the end of his days, when any person was recommended to him on the strength of a fine manner, or a good address, or a plausible, warm tongue, he would say only that he had learned his own way of valuing people long ago, and from 2 teachers, from a brother who had trusted a pleasant surface and died of it, and from a clockmaker's daughter who had taught him that you must never take a thing's word for its own honesty, for they all swear they are honest. You must take its rate, and watch it over time, and see whether it keeps true when keeping true grows expensive. His Duchess outlived him by some years, and wound his clocks to the last, and kept the true hour in that house while she had breath to keep it, and when she followed him, the shire, which had once had 3 settled opinions of him and none whatever of her, lined the road from the court to the church. Tenants and tradesmen and the taught to read, 3 deep in a November wind, for the clockmaker's daughter. It was not for her rank the county had rank to spare. It was that in 35 years no soul in that country, gentle or simple, had ever once had from Charlotte, Duchess of Wrenmoor, an hour that was not true, and it made hers the truest hour in the county. There is a thing known to every honest clockmaker, that a clock keeps no one's secret and takes no one's part, and at Wrenmoor they tell the story still, in the long way of the winter of the house that lasted 10 years and was ended by a stopped clock, an almanac, and a plain woman nobody watched. A charming, well-loved, well-vouched gentleman robbed the house that trusted him, and hid his ruin in the one clock he was sure would never be opened, and was believed against all comers, as charming gentlemen are, and every art he used, the false key, the bought witnesses, the tale turned neatly about, the great lady's love enlisted to crush the truth, was defeated in the end, not by a magistrate and not by a cleverer schemer, but by a quiet keeper of clocks who knew that an hour cannot be argued with, and who, holding in her lap the one proof that could cost her everything she had, carried it to the man she loved, because it was his and the truth was his. She was not saved by beauty, for she had little to spare, nor by fortune, for she had none at all, nor by anyone's belief in her word, for no one in that house believed it. She was saved by the plainest thing in the world, which is that the truth keeps its hour whether or not a single soul is listening, and whenever, long after, a warm voice was believed against a plain one, or a servant's honest word was called a schemer's spite, or a clever man forgot that somebody somewhere quietly keeps the count. Somebody in that county would tell of the gray clock keeper who would not wind a false hour to save her own life, and it made hers the truest hour in the county. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from, and what this story made you feel. And if it moved you, consider subscribing softly, so you won't miss the next one.